Hello, everyone. It's a Wednesday and 11:30 Central Time there in Oklahoma, 12:30 Eastern at the headquarters for the Voice of College Football. And welcome into our weekly Oklahoma show. We bring you each and every Wednesday at 12:30 and 11:30, depending on your time slot. And for 59 consecutive weeks. Unfortunately, just heard a couple minutes ago from Jason Ray, who joins us each and every week, that he will not be able to join us today. We may have an abbreviated show, but I am here to answer questions, respond to comments, and certainly had come with an agenda of items to discuss concerning Oklahoma football, the Big 12, and the SEC. First and foremost, hopefully you joined us last night as we went live and simulcasted on all our SEC channels, meaning Oklahoma and Texas as well, to discuss Greg Sankey's comments and the upcoming SEC football next week and the discussion concerning an SEC-only playoff. Check out that live stream. It certainly provided a lot of lively banter and phone calls from our viewers concerning the SEC threatening, in a sense, to form its own playoff. There had been talk earlier that the SEC with 16 teams would go to a mini tournament of sorts, maybe 4 teams, a semifinal format to determine the conference champion. But now there being discussion out there, and Greg Sankey being very forthright in stating that there are discussions on the table concerning an SEC playoff. Now, whether they would completely disband and separate from the rest of college football and try to legitimize an SEC champion as the national champion, we hope it doesn't come to that. Do not believe that it's good for college football. In no such way is it. Can it be argued? Would the SEC survive by itself? I believe so. It can still thrive. There are local and regional businesses out there that do quite well, and that's what it would be a regional business. Most likely in that model, if Greg Sankey and the powers in the SEC are that disgruntled, frustrated, and against the alliance and the Big 12 by extension, and what they are planning in terms of a playoff, and their refusal to pass the proposal that was set forth that I thought to be reasonable, even though I'm not in favor of a 12-team playoff, not because of the number of teams, the volume of teams, but because of the buys that would have to be implemented in the system because of the number of teams. Otherwise, I thought it was a reasonable and very well thought out, fair playoff proposal by the committee last summer. And by all accounts, it was some semblance of the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 that put a roadblock to it and did not approve it for whatever reason. I have no idea. Especially the Big Ten would benefit from a expanded playoff to 12 teams because they typically have a number of teams that are very good teams ranked nationally in the top 10 that miss the playoff. The Big Ten would benefit immensely, maybe more than the SEC. But Greg Sankey very upfront about we are seriously looking at a SEC-only playoff, and most likely that champion would then enter the national playoff or play a championship game against the winner of a other conference playoff format. So again, we went live for 3.5 hours last night discussing that, and have discussed it in a number of other platforms. So we went live here on the Oklahoma channel last night to discuss that with all of you. Also on my list is the Vegas release this week of over-under win totals. Oklahoma at 9.5. We can go through the schedule and guesstimate which would be a better play, 9 or 10, over or under on the Sooners win total for 2022, coming off, of course, a 10-2 regular season this past season. And if you take it back, history would tell us that 9.5 would be a good play as an over for Oklahoma football. Again, 10-2 in 2021. The 20 season was shortened to 10 games. So all the Vegas over-unders were null and void as the Sooners went 8-2 in the regular season in 2020. 2019 was, of course, an 11-1 regular season and Big 12 championship to follow. 2018 was also 11-1. 2017 at 11-1. 2016 a 10-2 team. 2015 at 11-1. So if we take it back to 2015 inside the college football playoff era to one more year, 2014, a down year at 8-4 in the regular season before getting blasted by Clemson in the Russell Athletic Bowl. History would tell us that the play to make is the over, but of course, the Big 12 a bit improved in recent years with Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State, giving Oklahoma some issues, and the Sooners not winning the Big 12 for the first time since 2014. So 9.5 the win total provided by Vegas. Also, the early line on the UTEP opener is 33.5. If you would like to know anything about the Miners as it pertains to a matchup with the Sooners in opening week, we discussed that with Steve Helwick a few weeks ago from Hustle Belt. The UTEP Miners, they're improved a program at 7-6 last year, barely lost a bowl game to Fresno State, a fringe top 25 team, UTEP and OU in week one. And we started to review recruiting classes with Jason last week. We checked out 2021. Of course, not much data, not much performance to go on there, but just wanted to see who is trending in which direction from the 2021 recruiting class. And we're going to go week by week by week by week through the recruiting classes, going backwards to see how they fared. Who were the booms? Who were the busts? How did players perform versus their ranking? And how did the class perform overall versus its Big 12 and national ranking? All right, let's see what all of you have to say. And again, I apologize for a bit of an abbreviated show without our expert, Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. We hope all is well there. Levi taking the lunch break. Ron telling us, I hope there was no LR or USC talk today. We will definitely more than wean ourselves off of the Lincoln Riley and USC talk in the future. Mostly it's been brought up by the chat and our response to the chat, but it's also been brought up by me. I will clearly state that I brought up some Lincoln Riley and USC talk when I believed that it was pertinent to what's going on. And of course, in the couple months following his departure, it was very much on the minds of everyone and very relevant to understand his performance at Oklahoma, Bob Stoops' performance in handing the reins to Lincoln Riley, how much we could credit Bob Stoops for the Lincoln Riley success, how much we could credit Riley, how much we could project Oklahoma going forward as a different type of program with a different set of priorities, a different feel, a different vibe, a different approach under Brent Venables than Lincoln Riley. And so the Lincoln Riley, and then many things had come out after Riley left. A couple players in particular discussed what it was like the day of Lincoln Riley's departure, his brief comments in front of the team that I felt the time given to the team inappropriate, not respectful. I don't know what was said, but the time given to the team not sufficient for a coach that had been there for 5 seasons and for a team that, regardless of maybe a few big game losses and regardless of whether you felt as though the program and the team met expectations this past season, certainly put it on the line and put Lincoln Riley in the position to gain the USC job. I haven't heard that discussed a whole lot, but that group of players and the players before them put Lincoln Riley in the position to be able to get the USC job. Therefore, he owed it to them more so than 5 minutes to discuss his decision and what they meant to him, what they meant to the program. All right, I'm done with Riley. I can't make out that handle. I don't know what you're communicating there. Dead RUZIAM. Maybe not a Rutgers fan, possibly. Boomer Sooner. Good to see you here. And again, we certainly apologize for the abbreviated and compromised show this week. But if you're here with us each and every Wednesday, you know we deliver on a regular basis Oklahoma football every Wednesday. It's 11:30 Central Time. And again, check out last night's show concerning SEC playoff possibilities. The talk that the SEC is going to go to a format in which they would play their own playoff. And then depending on how much angst there is between the SEC and the rest of college football, they may have to stand on their own playoff as being their champion, the champion, or play their champion against everybody else. And maybe participate in a playoff, maybe just say, hey, our champion is playing your champion. We will not participate in the playoffs. I hope it doesn't come to that, because of all the things that we're discussing concerning the transfer portal and the NIL, those two things in particular, ripping at the fabric of college football, compromising its purity, all those things. Supposed purity, I understand that, but still on the surface, purity, for lack of a better term, tradition, the base, the core, yes, at least the purity of the competition on the field. This might be the biggest death blow to college football, would be the SEC kind of ripping itself away, establishing its own deal, being separate from the rest of the nation. That would really tear into college football. It would be intriguing to see how it all played out, and it would be intriguing to watch a postseason, but it would not be good for the sport. And then you would see a response from the best programs outside the SEC in regards to, do we salvage what we have and stand up against this conference, or do we jump ship and try to join? And does the SEC become 32 strong 5 years from now? And as Dad is saying right here, yes, we certainly talked about that last night. Posturing. It's posturing by the SEC. But if the posturing by them is met with more isolation, so posturing, when you do that, when you take a stand or at least threaten to do something, then the response by the other side can go one of two ways. It can go a few different ways. Either they cower to your demands and they give in, or they put up an even bigger front against you, or hopefully there's something in between where they show that they're still strong, they're still capable by themselves, but they want to cooperate and work with you because it's best for everyone. So it depends on the response by the Big Ten more than anyone, but everyone else certainly, because the Big Ten is the one conference that can hang with the SEC in terms of viewership, money, resources, all of that as it stands right now, and has made more money than the SEC, has had a higher revenue total as reported the last two football seasons, but that will be soon blown away by the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, which, even as reports came out yesterday, still stands as an entry into the SEC in 2025. I still can't believe that that's necessarily going to happen. 2025. We've already played one football season with Oklahoma and Texas as lame ducks to a certain extent, or the Big 12 as a lame duck itself as being a different league. Are we going to go through 3 more football seasons with Texas and Oklahoma just hanging on to its ties to the Big 12 and playing within the conference, certainly being allowed, and the conference jeopardizing some reputation and taking the risk of Oklahoma and Texas being the best teams in the conference the next 3 years? Would that be a good look for the conference if Oklahoma and Texas, the odds of this happening are minuscule, but still on Oklahoma's side, they're not. And if Texas starts to produce with all this talent they're acquiring, what if Oklahoma and Texas play in the next 3 Big 12 championship games? What a look for the Big 12. And what are they going to do with, and this is a domino effect, of course, Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and UCF staying in the American Conference for another 3 football seasons? Or do they join the Big 12 and make for a 16-team Big 12? That would be power packed for 3 seasons, but you have to think that everybody who is involved in this situation, the SEC, but especially the conferences in the middle of this, the Big 12 and the American, because the American's losing teams but adding teams from the Sun Belt and Conference USA, that those conferences want this to be a even transition. They want the teams to depart at the same times that they add the other schools to not have an overlap. Not that an overlap would be the worst thing in the world, but especially for the Big 12, it could be a good look actually for a year or two, and they could really, certainly be rooting for their new entries to look good against the 2 leaving. But yes, posturing for sure. I don't think this is necessarily, I'm a betting man against this happening, that the SEC would pull this off, but I think they're capable of it, and I don't think they're completely threatening in a hollow sort of way. I don't think they want to do this. I think they understand that this would be to the detriment of college football in general, and to their detriment ultimately, because if it's not a national game and they're not involved nationally, and if they're shutting off the audience, 90% of the audience north of Kentucky and west of Texas and Oklahoma, then they're compromising a lot of their potential revenue, even though they would have a strong regional product. And it's been proven that a lot of SEC locations, a lot of SEC markets support the rest of college football heavily. And it would hurt the rest of college football heavily, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12, in terms of the support that they receive from SEC country. If you look at the TV markets in places like Birmingham and Chattanooga, and I'm looking for mid-markets, not necessarily Atlanta, New Orleans, Miami, but those mid-markets in SEC territory, they watch the other conferences, especially the Big Ten. They will be high on the list of markets that most watch an Ohio State Penn State game, for example. After the markets in Ohio and Pennsylvania, the markets that are watching the Ohio State Penn State game are in the SEC. They love football. Ron says, been hearing Arkansas is about to dump millions and millions into the NIL thingy. Sooner Thrawn says, what's a regular season for? Seems dumb. Yeah, if you've read through what, and again, this is not rumor. This is Greg Sankey saying we are looking at about 40 different scheduling models and playoff models, and they include, get this, 8 of the 16 SEC teams playing in a playoff. Now, that would have to be for a national playoff. That wouldn't just be for the conference championship. I believe that the conference championship, let's say things stay as is and there's simply an expanded playoff, and the SEC doesn't do anything crazy, and there's an expanded playoff to either 8 or 12 teams in 2026. Man, that seems like a long ways away. I would hope that things would get blown up and contracts would get torn apart and we could do something about that. But as it stands right now, with the proposal being shot down last summer, we're moving on to 2026 for playoff expansion nationally. I could see the SEC doing a 4-team tournament and really taking up a lot of space in college football territory, minds, ratings, to kind of take over the map and say, we're going to be the first. We've been the first to do just about everything. We were the first to do the conference championship game in 1992. We were the first to do this and this and that. We are going to be the first to have a conference championship tournament. Now that we've got 16 teams, we want 4 participants in the tournament to get our conference champion out into the playoff. But the 8-team system that's being talked about in the ESPN and other articles would not be to determine a conference champion. That would be the playoff. Dumb is right. That is saying the SEC with the 16 teams, and then you add Florida State and Miami would have its own championship game. Well, they would have an 18-team league. And again, there would be places like Ohio State would be the first one that would come to mind. USC would be second. Penn State would be up the list that you would think, are they really going to join forces and build a conference that's just as good as the other? They would need all of that together. The best of the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 to form some kind of a true alliance, not an alliance on paper, not an alliance of principled points, but a true alliance to stand up against the SEC. Florida State, Miami, I would think that the SEC would want Clemson to come aboard as well. If they could get to 20, that's a good number. 24 is a good number. 32 is, of course, aggressive, but that's a good number in terms of divisions, playoff. 18 is a bit of it can be worked with, but I would think that they would want, if they get Florida State and Miami, then they go after, let's say, Clemson and North Carolina, and they've got 20. Getting back to the over-under with a lot of Oklahoma fans, I'm surprised. Too many wins at 9.5, says Ron. So does Logan with 9, and David the same. Under. And of course, when you've got that narrow of a margin of error, each game's important, but you got to think that Nebraska road trip ultra important to that 9.5 win total. That says all the big boys will want to compete against the SEC. Therefore, a super conference will be created. No NCAA, just big boys playing for championships. Jay Jones says, call me a homer if you want, because I don't care. OU has a good shot of winning all of its regular season games. Oklahoma, I don't remember which of the best teams on the schedule are road games. They played at Oklahoma State last year, so that must be in Norman. I believe they played at Baylor last year, so that should be at home. Oklahoma, yes, if you size up each game, Oklahoma is as good, if not better, than everybody on the schedule. So if you take every game individually, Oklahoma could go 12-0. But it's the odds of going week after week after week after week after week and the odds catching up with you. But if you take each individual game, absolutely, there's no one Oklahoma's playing that they should be afraid of. Dead is happy with the Sooners, happy with Brent Venable's recruiting prowess. I appreciate it. We got Cole here, Nebraska fan. We appreciate you being here, Cole. And on our Nebraska show, so Oklahoma fans understand that we've got 25 team channels, not just Oklahoma. So we've got other channels for you to check out, including, I know, Texas. We've got Texas and West Virginia also in the Big 12. We have Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa in the Big 10. We've got USC and Oregon in the Pac-12. We have Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M, LSU, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, and Georgia in the SEC. Then we've got an ACC lineup of Virginia Tech, Miami, North Carolina, Florida State, Clemson, and we've got Notre Dame. The reason I say that is we do these live streams on a number of those channels, not every one. We have a Nebraska show every Tuesday at 6. Join us then, 6 Central. And we are going to have Parker Thune on as we're running through, doing our best to get a media guest for every opponent on the schedule. For Oklahoma, we are supposed to be joined by a Kent State radio play-by-play guy today. He got thrown into a meeting last minute, unfortunately, so he hopes to join us in the next few weeks. We talked the UTEP opener. We will talk Nebraska, and we are also having Parker Thune from OU Insider 247 Sports on our Nebraska show next week. Cole, we appreciate you being here. Cole, I know you sent me a DM. I had a response. We can talk about that further. So thanks for being here. Yes, if you missed the beginning of the show, I let you know that Jason, unfortunately, at the last second could not be here. The real MVP, BYU, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati are going to be in the Big 12 in 2023. That was confirmed a few weeks ago. Yeah, I guess we did talk about that in terms of the transition. So I often lose track of what was confirmed, what was not. And yes, we did address that. And again, like everything else, we had a show on that. So we did go through that edition of those 4 in 2023. So that means that I hope, because I like oddities and I don't like these things to transpire and transition smoothly, because I like to see a little bit of pressure, a little bit of tension, a little bit of awkwardness in the transition, to put a little bit of heat and see certain teams, coaches, and administrators and leagues in certain situations they don't want to be in. So it would be great. I would love to see Oklahoma and Texas stick around for at least one season with BYU, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati. I know that the Big 12, and I'm sure that there's a scheduling model out there that could be put together pretty easily that would include those 4, play your 9 conference games. I believe this is possible, and avoid playing any of those 4 against Texas and Oklahoma, so that the current members of the Big 12 could have their last go around, because there are rivalry considerations with just about all of them to a certain extent against Oklahoma and Texas. Although I would want to see Oklahoma and Texas play those 4 teams. That's what I would like to see. Oklahoma, BYU. We saw that game about 15 years ago at Texas Stadium, or whatever they call it now, Jerry's World. Oklahoma, BYU, we saw the Cougars upset a number 1 Oklahoma team. That was when Sam Bradford got hurt. Oklahoma, Houston, of course, we've seen that a couple times recently. Houston pulled off an upset in 2016 at Reliant Stadium. I believe that game was played at Reliant Stadium in Houston against Baker Mayfield and company. Oklahoma, UCF, I have no account of those two teams playing. Oklahoma, Cincinnati, I do not remember those two getting together at any point. Texas, BYU, Taysom Hill had his way 2 consecutive years for BYU against Texas, and BYU completely embarrassed Texas in one of those games. I believe they won the other game in a close game, but they put up a 60-something spot, I believe. I'd have to go back and check out the score, but over 500 yards rushing on Texas. Completely embarrassed Texas. Would love to see BYU and Texas get back together. Texas and Houston, that's an old Southwest Conference game. Great series, great rivalry in the Southwest Conference, and those two were high performers in the Southwest Conference. Would love to see Texas, Houston. I'm almost certain that they have not played since the Southwest Conference disbanded in 1994. Texas, UCF would be an entertaining game, as well as Texas and Cincinnati. I have no recollection of those teams getting together either. But to Real MVP, thank you for the reminder. I need those not on occasion. I need those on a regular basis. There is so much we go over here and so many things that are confirmed and discussed that I lose track, even though, yes, once that was confirmed, we actually had a show, talked about it. That says COVID hurt the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. The SEC will never pair up with those clowns. Well, what COVID showed us is where each league stands in its commitment to football. And I think it showed us where each league stands was very apparent, and that the Big Ten, despite all its success, as being in many ways, it's right there with the SEC in regards to revenue, TV ratings. Actually, TV ratings favored the Big Ten this past year, and rear ends in the seats. That the Big Ten is the most divided, and I say it in this way: the Pac-12 basically went along with the Big Ten at one point to go ahead and play, but it was pretty obvious that the Pac-12 had the least pushback from its fan base in deciding not to play football. We know what the political climate is out there, and that was the decision that was made until the Big Ten stepped up, decided to play, and the Pac-12 came along. So the Pac-12 is on that side. The SEC was firm in its stance to do everything possible to play football. It was committed to figuring out a way to play football. It was not ignoring the situation. It delayed its start. There were a lot of games canceled. Many of them made up, but they still had to cancel games. So the SEC did not ignore the pandemic in any such way. They just took the stance that we understand the situation. We are doing everything possible to deal with what it is, but we are determined to play football. Then the ACC played off of that, and then the Big 12 joined third. The Big 10 was somewhere in the middle. And I think the issue with the Big 10 is that if you look at the hierarchy of the institutions, the administrators, the presidents, the chancellors, those people, academia, they are of the Pac-12 type mindset when it comes to academics versus athletics, and especially football. But the Big Ten fan base and by extension, the players and the coaches, they fought for football because Big Ten football is huge, and it's huge in those states. And so you have a battle, you have a confrontation, you have two different types of thought within the Big Ten as opposed to the other conferences that tend to be more unified. And I didn't necessarily know that about the Big Ten. I wasn't surprised. It's pretty obvious, but we saw it play out. But the coaches, the players, the fans were so adamant that even though the commissioner and the league foolishly announced, we're not playing, they then played. When you take everything into consideration, the Big Ten has run a very strong football operation for all the geographic trends moving against it for the last 4 decades, people moving south, people moving west, and with having to fight that. And in many ways, it's a good thing. The academic standards are fine, but beyond that, the mindset that we saw during the pandemic for the Big Ten to match the SEC in revenue, ratings on television, and rear ends in the seats is pretty phenomenal. All right, I'm going to move ahead in the chat, see what you guys are talking about. David, is college football. We would love it to remain college football. The term student athlete starts with student, whether that's reality or not. Ron says the Big 12 is going to have a new commissioner, James Franco. Don't know much about him. I've seen the name. Dave says the Big 12 is dead. It's certainly not dead. It may be dead as a Power 5. And that's going to be the debate, because right now the term Power 5 versus Group of 5 doesn't much matter. It's a term that we use as fans and media to distinguish the levels of play. But in determining the college football playoff, the selection committee just flat out determines and selects the 4 teams that they want in the playoff. But going forward, if a playoff proposal goes through that distinguishes the Power 5 and those receiving automatic bids and potentially buys in the playoff, then that is going to have to be determined whether the Big 12 is still a Power 5 or is a Group of 5 now. And that's going to be difficult to distinguish. I see arguments on both sides, and I see valid arguments on both sides. I tend to believe that it's still, when looking at the ACC and when looking at the Pac-12, still a Power 5 conference. The issue is not having the elite of Oklahoma and the potential elite of Texas, and nobody having, until proven otherwise, there has not been a school in what's left of the Big 12 that has ever been a football elite. None of them. Maybe on a given season, TCU was elite in 2014. Baylor was elite for a season or two during that time. Oklahoma State, you could argue, in 2011 was elite one season, but not with any sustained power. All right, I kind of remember that, Aaron. When I said Oklahoma, Cincinnati, I was thinking they did get together at some point, and I didn't remember exactly when that was. Aaron, thank you for that. Early 2000s, when Brian Kelly was at Cincinnati. If my laptop is going to cooperate, I wanted to check out those scores. A home and home with Cincinnati. Jay says here Nebraska was better than people give them credit for, although that's been a discussion in college football that I think at this point people understand how close Nebraska was to being good last year, despite only having 3 wins, playing within one score of 4 teams ranked in the top 10. And so the trip to Lincoln with Nebraska bringing in the best transfer portal team in the Big Ten. Nebraska stands number 1 in the Big Ten and roughly in the top 10 in transfer portal rankings. And that was prior to bringing in Marcus Washington, the wide receiver from Texas that they just signed in the last 24 hours or so, and the defensive lineman Stephon Wynn from Alabama. So Nebraska should be much improved. Will they take the step of closing out games, making the right decisions, playing with the proper amount of poise in the fourth quarter to win the games? Yeah, these games, Dead, are coming back to me, these Oklahoma-Cincinnati games, but I'm not getting any cooperation here, unfortunately, from my laptop. It's locked up. If it sits too long, then I'm in trouble. Jay says Barry Switzer's NIL proposal is to provide $40,000 to $50,000 to every player. Not sure that will interest a lot of 4 to 5 stars. I just I don't want players to be outright paid as employees. I completely agree with what's going on with NIL. I don't like the way it's been handled, and I wish somebody would have seen it coming like we did in 2013, posted a video in 2013 concerning NIL. But anyway, that it wasn't structured from the get-go. But I would rather have a situation in which the college athlete is still the college athlete, but they, like any other American, go out into the free market system and earn a buck if they so choose. And for it to merely be accounted for by the IRS and by the school, and for the school to provide some type of direction so that they understand what it's like to go into contract with somebody, understand the taxes, understand the drawbacks, potential pitfalls and issues. That's what the school's there for, to educate. There you go, Dave. We see this over and over and over. Everyone misses the point on NIL. It is outside football and outside the university. It is simply allowing these student athletes in any sport to be Americans and not to be restricted to where they cannot earn money like anybody else. The 14 or 15-year-old can go on TikTok and make silly music videos and dance around and make a ton of money, or go on Instagram. So now the collegiate athlete can do the same outside of a football income. This is not a football pay-for-play situation. And it shouldn't be, and we don't want it to be. All right, folks, next up, we've got Ohio State Live coming up at 1:30 Eastern on the Ohio State channel. We hope you will join us there. Again, unfortunately, Jason Ray could not join us today. Appreciate all of you being here, and we will be back hopefully next week with another solid, packed show of Oklahoma football content. And again, we are contacting media members from all the opponents on the schedule. We've knocked out UTEP. We were supposed to have Kent State on today, but we will go contact each media member that we have contact with to represent all the opponents, go through the schedule, and preview those games for 2022. Ohio State live at 1:30, Michigan at 5, Florida State at 6, Miami at 7. Please join us on those respective channels to talk college football, and we will see you next week right here on OU Sooners Live.